So I'm Kathleen Walker with the New England Endurance Events, and this is our second Tri-Talk. Our Tri-Talk tonight is with Angela Naeth, and she is a 15 plus year professional triathlete and cyclist. She's been an endurance coach since 2010. She started swimming or teaching swimming when she was only 15 years old. So she's been at this for quite some time. She heads up the Angela Naeth Coaching Collaborative. And you'll see her website, or at least you'll see her name of her coaching collaborative. Angela Naeth, sorry, I'm about to cough. Angela Naeth Coaching all over on every slide. Just add a .com to that and you can find her website. We are super excited to have her. And if I didn't say it before, I need to say it now. We are recording. If some of your friends aren't able to join or you want to go back and look at something, Angela has got so much information tonight, and you guys are it's going to be lots and lots and lots of stuff. There might be some things that you want to go back and look at later on. You're like, what did she say about that? You can go to our YouTube page and you can find that on our website. So if you go to the YouTube page, I will have the recording of tonight up by tomorrow sometime. So feel free to go back to that or to send your friends there. We love that too. So without further ado, Angela, would you like to go ahead and get started?
Yeah. Thanks for coming, everyone. I'm going to share my screen here and we are going to make it so that I can play it. Does everybody see that good? Can
Mhm.
you see it? All right. All right, I will get right into it because I have a lot of slides and a lot of info. I may skip over a few slides just because of the nature of I tend to kind of overdo it sometimes. Um, this is all about trying to understand how to train better and race better, and looking at an endurance training framework to kind of understand your body and how you can get it to perform at its best. So we're going to break it up into 7 types of things that we're going to look at. The first is looking at zones that you use, how you build your architectural house, how you can structure your week, track the right metrics, and make sure you don't skip the essentials and the common mistakes that we can hopefully avoid, and then re-looking at everything and recapping and reassessing every couple months. All right, so the 2 foundational rules for anybody that's in endurance sports is you want to train your body and use your data. So if you're always training by feel alone, it's like driving something without any directions. I'm just gonna make this smaller so that I can see my screen better. All right, well, I won't be able to. I'm seeing people's things. All right, so the first thing that we want to do to make sure that you're training right is to make sure that you have accurate zones. This is like the foundation of all training. If you were to go out for a run and just run by feel, you could be running at a way too high of an effort comparatively to what you should be doing. So if you have a protocol and a baseline of your zones, then you can take that and take that into a structured week for yourself to get to a race or an event in a proper way so that you're not overdoing it, overuse, or actually underdoing it. So what does this mean? So when you want to try to create a zone, you want to use some type of test, some type of understanding where you are as an individual. And so if you don't test, and I'll explain that in a bit, then you're really kind of just going by the whim. So you could be going again too hard, too fast, too slow. And so really you want to be able to calibrate your effort. And it's a small investment to really get the training efficiency you need in order to perform afterwards in your races. So I broke this up into training zones specific to swim, bike, run. These are your bike zones. Now, I know it looks like a lot of numbers and stuff, but I'm trying to showcase to you not only rate of perceived effort, which starts from 1 to 10, all the way to 10 being all out. But you can look at it if you were to use power on the bike, heart rate, and if you were to go in a lab, you can look at lactate. And we at Angela Naeth Coaching use ZR to Z4, which is kind of your VO2 work. Now, some people may go zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A lot of the zones are the same, but some people use different percentages based on lactate thresholds, which you don't even really need to know at this point. But I really like ZR to Z4 or VO2 because ZR should truly be recovery. So that's when you're going for a super easy spin and you're hardly moving your legs. And it just reminds you, the athlete, that it's all about recovery. And then we build into the base, the endurance, and the threshold work. Same thing for the run. If you were to look at the percentages of the bike versus the run, they are a little different. So if you were to go get tested in a lab or somehow find your heart rate zones or power zones, you have to understand that your bike zones and your run zones are going to be different, or they should be, especially in heart rate, because when you run, you have gravity against you. You're not on a bike that will help propel you. And so the heart rate changes. Your powers are obviously different because you're using different things. And what I like to use a lot is pace in the run. And so that's something I'll explain here in a little bit. But again, we go ZR to VO2. Once you have a set of zones for yourself, then you can look at your training. Say, okay, today I'm going to do some threshold work, and you really know what that means versus I'm going to just see how I feel. And then for swim, now swim training is a little bit different because sometimes people need a little bit more technique or understanding, and a lot of us pretty much swim at the same speed. But really, there are zones, and they could be very different by like 2 seconds or so. But again, you want to go ZR to Z3. Now, this can be explained. So if you were to do an Ironman effort feel is like zone 1, a 70.3 is zone 2, and Olympic and sprint is zone 3. That's how I kind of explain it to athletes so that when they go into the pool, they understand, okay, this is my Olympic sprint kind of effort versus this is my all day effort like an Ironman. All right. So there's a lot of metrics out there. There's heart rate, there's pace, there's rate of perceived effort, there's power. And so looking at all of those, the gold standards are power and pace. So basically, if you don't have power and you don't want to use pace, that's fine, but you just have to understand that those are the standards that everything comes from. And so if you're to use heart rate, for example, you have to think of it as a gauge because the heart rate can change from so many different outside things versus like heat, if you've slept well, caffeine, it's kind of like a gauge telling you what is happening within the context of your body. Whereas power and pace actually show your actual effort and what you're actually putting out. And so using that kind of as the standard and everything else around it, that's where you want to look at all the metrics. And then RP, which is rate of perceived effort, which is really valuable, is does this feel right? And so putting either pace, power, and heart rate and rate of perceived effort, and you look at all of those, then you kind of get a sound understanding of what your zones are. And that's kind of how we combine them. So again, the primary is if you have power on the bike, speed or pace on the run and swim. And then we also have run power. You can get a little stride pod and you can get your power on your run. And then the heart rate is kind of like a monitoring tool. And then your rate of perceived effort is understanding that the spirit of the workout is easy, medium, hard. And so these are different. So depending on what you choose, you have to kind of understand where it's coming from. And that's kind of where this is going. And so let's look at the bike for a bit. So a lot of people understand what functional threshold power is. So functional threshold power is what people generally do a test for. So they do 20 minutes as hard as they can, and then they take 0.95 of that and they get their functional threshold power. Now, some people take that test and get your threshold heart rate. It somewhat correlates, but what I'm trying to say is that it's not as exact as it could be. And so the standard is the critical power tests that we will go over, and they're not hard. And I will explain to you if you don't have power, what you can do. And then this is the same thing for the run and the swim. So critical power is something that gives you where you are in your physiology, and critical speed, which is your pace, tells you as well. This will all make sense in a moment. So for the bike, for example, so we all know that you do a 20-minute time trial to get a functional threshold power. Well, critical power, we do 3 tests, and it provides a power duration curve. So this is how much power and understanding for you. So you do a 3-minute all-out effort, a 6, and a 12, and you get this critical power threshold. That's kind of just your threshold blanket, and it's a lot more accurate compared to a functional threshold power. So if you were to go and do a test, what I would recommend is you do a 3-minute, a 6-minute, and a 12-minute all-out versus the 20-minute to get that. And it's the same thing for the run, but we do it by pace, where we do a 400 meter, an 800 meter, and a 3200, which is 2 miles. And then you'll get that power duration curve and then your critical speed. Now, those two numbers, critical power and critical speed, are the standards for your zones. And so these again are the tests. And then the swim, we do the same thing similar to the run, but it's obviously in the water. And what happens is, let me go back to quickly. So here you can see where the critical power is and the critical pace for the run. So you can see that those are the standards, and then we base the heart rates off of those, is how we like to do it for pure accuracy. Now, sometimes when you do testing for the run, I was talking about a stride pod. You can get power for the run, and it's really, really helpful. It's very similar to power on the bike in terms of understanding. But again, the gold standard is to find your pace and then match it to your power. And so, just as a lay thing here, if you want to understand more zones, we offer free zone testing at Angela Naeth Coaching, so you can just head over there and we'll make this all make sense to you. But there is a lot of things that are a bit very specific to the athlete to get the zones. And that's what I really, really want to emphasize is if you just go and do one test or take it from one race, there's so many things that are outside of the factors of that could affect those all the time. And that's why we test every 6 to 8 weeks, because if you set your heart rate zones, a lot of things can change, and you want to really standardize them to your actual paces so that you can see if you're making improvements. And so this is kind of just late. We will skip that one. Um, we'll skip these because don't need to. Already went through that. All right. So just an overall thing about heart rate zones. So again, FTP is kind of the old method. It doesn't really correlate with who you are as an athlete. When you get more points on that data point of a critical power curve versus just one, which is like the FTP one, you get a more of an understanding and specificity to who you are. Once you do those, and if you're just a runner, I shouldn't say just, but if you do running, if you do pacing tests, then you compare that to your heart rate zones, you're going to be working in very specific zones, which I will explain now why they're so important. So once you have your zones, let's say you've created your zones, you did the testing, you got all this stuff done. What does that mean, and how do you go about actually using that to your advantage? And this is where the analogy of the house comes in. So the first thing that you want to do is obviously know which type of race you're going to do. So let's just pick one. We'll do a half Ironman. And understanding that, okay, let's say you pick a half Ironman and it's like 4 or 5 months away. Just having that in the back of your mind, like where and how do I train now to lead up to that race? And so part of that is this house analogy. So imagine yourself as a house. And so everyone has an aerobic base. The bigger the foundation, the stronger that house will be. And then you build up the structure of their house and then overall the roof and the ceiling. So the first thing that comes, which a lot of coaches and athletes talk about, is like aerobic base, lots of slow, easy miles. And that's kind of the durability, that foundation block. From there, you want to build some thresholds. So this could be race type if you're an Ironman athlete. Like this is kind of the level that just comes above the foundation where you're working at, say, zone 2 on our effort levels and sometimes zone 3. Now, what I was talking about, the critical power and critical speed, that is your ceiling. So what happens is let's say you go do a test and we find that your critical speed for the run is 10-minute miles. So that is your ceiling. So all of your training below that should be below 10-minute miles, because that's how you're going to build a bigger and stronger house. And so the first thing is always foundation. You build up the race execution, and then you do a little bit more up. So every time you do more and more training within the context of this in progressive layers, that's what a lot of coaches do, is in that you're going to raise your pace, which is your ceiling, and that way you will get faster. So the more layers you build up, the faster that speed will become. Now there comes a point where you hit that ceiling. You can't go any higher. And so that's when that VO2, those all-out efforts come into play, because that allows your house to expand taller so that your speeds can come up and all of your zones get faster. And so understanding and seeing yourself like this as a athlete can help you understand what you should do for your training and why you're doing the stuff that you're doing. So, a lot of the times, coaches and athletes look into training blocks. So, a lot of times when we start in January or December, we're in a durability block, a building block, where we're just building that foundational layer. And then from there, we build up on each one of those. Now, a lot of the times, if you're an athlete, if you're self-coached or coached or not, you want to build that foundational block. So, that comes first. And that's kind of just getting those long, long, easy miles. And from there, you build from house to house, from floor to floor to floor. Now, the base phase, which I was just talking about, is the most critical phase. It's the most important block because if you don't have a strong foundation, your house is going to crumble probably 6 months later. It's usually anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks, and there's a lot of aerobic swims, long, easy runs and bikes, and a lot of strength work within the context of that. Now, this is just a general overview. A lot of coaches do things very, very differently. At Angela Naeth Coaching, we do as well, but this is to give you guys some understanding of where and what you should be doing as you get toward your races. So what you're doing in this foundation is it's 75 to 80%. Now that's a lot of easy volume. So that's like 3, 4, 5 out of 10 effort on the RPE scale. And you're building up a capacity of aerobic fitness. So you're building out that foundation. Structural integrity. Again, think of yourself as a house. You want that nice and strong. And throughout the layers, every time you go into a new block, you always want to keep that foundation. The bigger the foundation, the bigger your house will be, and the higher your critical power and your pace will be, and the faster you will get. So no matter where you are in the season, you're always doing aerobic fitness because that is the base that you always want to keep. And your race speed sits on top of that foundation. The next one is your build block. So a lot of coaches and athletes then go into a phase where they're doing a little bit harder effort. So this is the zone 2, 3 efforts, and it helps you sustain what you've already reached with your foundation. So now we're on the second layer, say, and now we're pushing up onto that critical power and critical speed. So we're increasing the height of your house so that you become faster. Again, when you're doing this in the build phase, you're still doing a ton of aerobic fitness. No matter what phase you're in, you're doing about 70% aerobic speed, okay? So you're always doing constant aerobic load. And this can last anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks. And then then what happens is sometimes you get so high in your build phase, you need to add some of that roof, right? Because you've already maxed out on your ceiling. And so that's where you want to raise the ceiling. So you have to do some higher end workouts. Again, when you go into a VO2 block, for example, and you're doing these hard efforts, you're still doing a lot of foundation. You don't want to jump into this right away if you're new or anything because it is very, very hard efforts, but they're short. And this whole block is very, very short. It's only if you've done so much aerobic fitness, you need to get those VO2 efforts in. Now, the third layer, we go foundation, build, specificity. Now, this is where you get very specific to your race. So let's say you've done your foundation, you've done some build work, you've done a little bit of VO2. You want to live in that house that you've built. And so you need to be very specific in your training. So this is something 3 to 6 weeks before your race, or sometimes in different avenues if you've already built a long base, which I'll explain in a bit. But this really is important for you to understand that you can execute on race day. So this is doing efforts that are very specific to your race. But again, you can't skip the foundation, you can't skip some of the base, and you can't skip some of the VO2. Otherwise, your house is fragile and you're not really going to be able to expand it or be able to get the best out of yourself. And then again, well, not again, but let's say you've raced. Now you have to rebuild and reset. So that's just total recovery. So within the context of all these blocks, we do have other blocks that I use, which is like a hybrid block, which we use all different types. And a lot of coaches, let's see here. All right, so here's an example of where many coaches in the endurance world, because it's kind of like the base of our education in that sense, is we build the base, we build the threshold, we do some VO2, we do some specificity, and then we race. We taper and go into the race. As you can see, each one of these has a lot of green in it. The green is that aerobic load, but you can see the differences on what type of percentages, at least that I use in my coaching, within the blocks and how they are slightly different from each other as we get toward the races. Now, sometimes you don't always want to go and build up foundation, base, specificity, and all the way up. And that depends on where you are in your races and if you've actually built that really strong layer. Sometimes you want to stay in a build block and other times you don't. So these are just questions you can ask yourself if you need to do some more higher end work. So is your race 3 to 6 weeks out? Yes. You have to do specificity in order to get the best out of yourself. Am I able to put out some efforts and hold them near my threshold or race efforts? Probably not. If you can't, then you should go into a threshold work because you have to push up on that pace in order to build that nice strong house. And so within that context, you have each one of those blocks has a different type of workload. And so this is where the specific avenues of what you do each day really matters in order to get the best out of your performance. And here's just a very simple under thing. So if you can't hold a steady pace for a long time, obviously you need to build an endurance base. So that's where you go into that foundational block. If you can't really push hard when you're going into those really hard efforts, you need to raise your roof. And so in order to do that, you have to do the second layer so you can push up on that roof. If you find that you're fading on races, you might need to practice your race pace efforts, but you also need to build that foundation. And so I'm showing this to showcase to you that you don't always want to do the same training day in or week in every week. You want to see the changes, and these changes should happen every 6 to 8 weeks as you test and look at yourself. And so to get the most out of your body, you really want to be able to get all of those layers so that you are performing at your best and building this beautiful house for yourself, and being able to live in it. Now, as I was saying, the standard progression is where you build in durability, you raise the floor, you raise the ceiling with some VO2 efforts, and then you go into very specific, and then you taper into your race. This is the standard that many coaches use. It works for many athletes. It works for all athletes. But there are some changes that can happen. And so what I like to showcase is this is a standard house. So if you were to build a house and have the framework and all this stuff, this is what the house would look like. But now you want to look into the rooms. You want to get into the specifics that you are as an athlete. And in order to do that, you need to look at different things versus just following the standard progression. And so part of that is here's your standard house. As we were saying, I'm just showing it again. And so the idea of this house came from Phil Skiba, and I've worked with him for a couple years now. But you want to imagine your race speed equals your height. So you mark it and then you grow taller as you go. In the beginning, the whole house can grow, but at some point you're going to hit that roof or that ceiling and you need to be able to renovate, right? And so that's where those layers come in. So if you hit your pace because you've done that, you have to change what you're doing in your training in order to build a bigger and more structurally sound house. All right, so here you have a house. You've done all those bricks. I mean, all those blocks that you've done progressively. But now you have to look at your house. You've just built out the layering foundation. It works for all athletes. However, to get the most out of you, you need to understand what you want in that house, what you have in that house, and how you can get the most out of yourself. And so that comes with your physiology. And this is a little bit more advanced. But I wanted to showcase this because there is changes that happen, and this is really very something that is you can do for yourself, even if you're coached or not coached. And so, a lot of the times when you look at the architecture of this house, right, you can't really build multiple rooms all at once. And it's not always built in a fixed thing where you do every layer. Like that's a very standard amount. But you have to look at yourself and what you're doing as a race or what your race schedule is. So part of that is something called the critical speed, critical power over your VO2. That ratio, so if you were to take, I'm going to put this in words. So let's say you test on the bike and you have power on your bike. And we find that your critical power, which is your threshold, is 150 watts. Okay. Putting that over your VO2, which is usually a 3 minute all out effort. So let's say that's 200 watts. So that ratio, 150 over 200, is what, 0.75, tells you what you need or what you have in your house. So you can either be really strong aerobically, or you could be anaerobically, or you could be an athlete that kind of has everything balanced. And so as coaches that understand this, this is how I coach is we look at all of this and determine if you are an aerobic athlete, an anaerobic athlete, a balanced athlete, and this should change every 6 to 8 weeks because we put you in specific blocks based on what you need to build out. And so let's say, for example, so these are the kind of the three types that you could be. So you could be someone who has an anaerobic profile, like say we were to test this week. Okay. So you really have a very top end, but you need to build out more aerobic load. Whereas an aerobic athlete can go on forever and they really need to build up the top end of their house. And so every athlete, even if it's February or March, could be doing totally different things because each house needs something different. And so that's where the progressive thing of base, durability, build, and all that does not work for every athlete because every athlete may have a different profile that they have to look at. And that's where the very specific training comes into play. And so, for example, let's say we have an athlete who's doing 70.3 in 16 weeks. She is a very aerobic athlete on the bike, but on the run, she's an anaerobic athlete after doing all the tests and stuff. So we don't do the same things. For her bike, we do really some really high-end efforts, even if she like to build up her anaerobic profile. Whereas on the run, we need to keep her doing aerobic load and make it really, really low aerobic pacing and heart rate. And so you can see that even though the athlete is getting ready for this race in on the bike, they're doing something very, very different than they are on the run. And so it just depends where they are as an athlete. And that's why zones and testing and looking at if you really want to get the most out of your training is you want to look at this stuff because this is where you can make those changes in your training in order to perform better and you're actually doing things to make you go faster versus just swim, bike, run. So after all that, just to kind of showcase how you would structure that into your week, here's an example. It looks like a lot of words. This is from Training Peaks. This is how I coach athletes. But you kind of balance it out with some swimming. And this athlete is in a build threshold on the bike and is on a build durability on the run. So on the run, this athlete needs to build out their foundation. And on the bike, they need to do some efforts at that second layer because of their profiles that we looked at. And so testing and all that really comes into play when you work with a coach or depending on what coaching you do. But this is just an example of how I would lay out a week going from Monday through Sunday, where we usually have a longer bike on the Saturday, and kind of separate the runs into 3 to 5 days and the bikes into 4 days and 3 to 4 swims a week. Now, again, this does not show a day off, but a lot of my athletes do take a day off, and it's very, very important, which we'll look at in the essentials. Just to totally over say this, but again, 70 to 80% of your load, even in this week that you see, is easy work. So it's that zone one effort. And so when you look at ZR 1, 2, 3, that would be like a zone 2 that a lot of people talk about. But with Angela Naeth Coaching, we use zone one. But just to emphasize, no matter what block, no matter where you are in your training, you really want to get that aerobic load. This is again just to compare each one of those blocks again as we talked about it. So you are doing a little bit in every type of layer, but in every specific block, you're doing very specific workload to help raise that part of your house. Um, and I was just overviewing that. So I know that was a lot. But what I want you guys to understand from that is that not one athlete is the same and not one athlete should be doing the same thing as the next. Now, everyone does need an aerobic load, everyone needs a foundation. But if you were to go into the nitty-gritty of looking at, okay, am I an anaerobic athlete or am I an aerobic athlete? I need to do or change this so I can make those rooms in that house a little bit better. And then after 8 weeks of doing a specific type of workload, you recheck yourself and say, okay, well, I was an anaerobic athlete, but now I'm balanced. So now what do I do? Well, now you need to work on other layers of the house. Or you could be an anaerobic athlete and then 8 weeks later, because you've done all this work to kind of get out of that, now you're an aerobic athlete. And so now you need to do more higher end stuff. So you're just constantly building this house brick by brick by brick by brick. And every athlete and every sport is a little bit different. And so doing the same things every week is not going to get the best out of yourself. And so that's kind of where this comes into play. Looking at all that, we also look at the different types of metrics. So these are subjective and objective ones. And so if you have a account in Training Peaks or Today's Plan or something like that, you're going to look at things that are like HRV and ATL and form, TSS, all of this, right? So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what those are because they are valuable. And if you're coaching yourself, it's really good to understand these. So ATL, which is your acute training load, is what you've done in the last 7 days and it compounds. So if it's day 8, that last day rolls off. It's the amount of load that you've done within that 7 to 10 days. Your TSB, which is your form, is your chronic training load minus your ATL, which is so your chronic training load is how much you've done over the last 42 days, and that's rolling as well. So the form, your TSB, is constantly changing as how much load you've put on in the last 42 days and in the last week. And so it's constantly changing. So let's say, for example, I'm doing some crazy event this weekend of 300 miles. That's going to make my acute training load so big. And so my form is going to drop because I'm going to be really, really tired from that. Whereas if I did this event, say 30 days ago, I still could have some fatigue in me because I've built all of this load up, right? And so it's a constant look over of where you are as an athlete within the context of how much load you've put on your system. Now, TSS is a score that every workout you put out there has some type of score. So, for example, if you were to do an easy 30-minute jog, let's say it gives you a score of 20 to 30 TSS. Now, this is built on a lot of different types of metrics. You'll want to make sure that they're accurate. And so if you are working with a coach, they should be able to look back at your numbers and make sure that they're actually recording the specific things. But that is different than if you were to do a hard jog or a hard run, whereas your TSS would be like a 40 or a 50. All of that comes into play with your load and your training stress. And so when you look on Training Peaks, you're going to see all this stuff, but at least you kind of can understand what it means in the context of what they actually are. So I was just telling you about like the calibration rule. So if you were to look at these metrics and you really wanted to understand them, you want to go back at least 42 days and make sure that every day, like let's say you go for a run and it puts in 2 inputs, that's going to mess up your form and your CTL. So you want to just clean those up. So you want to delete them or look at them. And then you also want to look at how the training stress is. So if you open up and click on a workout, it gives you that score. Now, sometimes it automatically takes your power. Sometimes it estimates. There's a bunch of buttons. If you could look into them and make sure that every single one of them is the same as the next, then you'll at least get some type of accuracy in this type of metrics. And so you can actually really look at, okay, well, my form is like -10. Why is that? Um, so it just kind of gives you some type of understanding of what all this data is. You don't really have to understand it, but to really kind of have an overview, it's really, really helpful because you can see, okay, I'm really not feeling really well today, or I feel great. Why is that? So you can kind of look at these things as you do that. This is an example of an athlete where you can see all the different types of metrics. And so you can see how their loads and their form changes from last week's minus 27.6, whereas today they're at -11. And then coming in the future, if they did all their workout plans, this is where their form would be. So it changes all the time is kind of what I'm trying to show. And just as a brief thing, when you look into Training Peaks and you have that right-hand side, I know a lot of us use Training Peaks. The right-hand side is the projected form. It's not your actual form, and it takes all the things that you do. So it's not separating it into bike and run. To do that, you have to go into the nitty-gritty. We've developed a thing with Angela Naeth to really look at all the metrics, and it separates it all so that as a coach, I can come in and look and say, okay, this athlete needs some recovery on the bike, recovery on the run. So we really look at all that. But I just want to make sure that you know that on this right-hand side of the Training Peaks, it puts everything together. If you've recorded a walk, strength work, and I don't know if your data is accurate. So you really want to just make sure that your hygiene of your data is really, really good if you're going to use the metrics. And you don't have to use these metrics. I'm just wanting to explain them to you. And this is an example of the swim. So again, we separate swim, bike, run. All right. So just if you were to look at these, a really good signs is that your chronic training load is slowly increasing. And again, you want to be able to do the maximum amount of work with recovery. That's what's going to make you fast. And so if your chronic training load is slowly increasing, that means you're adapting to the load. If you see your chronic training load slowly dropping or not really moving, you need to question why and how you can change that. And so looking at that and making sure that your form is kind of in that sweet spot. So that's anywhere from 0 to -15. And that again will fluctuate a lot. And the warning signs, if you can't hit your zones when you're training, you're constantly tired, elevated resting heart rate. You want to look at all of these things if you are going to look into this. A really good coach or plan really looks at not only the objective stuff, but all of this stuff inside of that, because it really gives the holistic view of what an athlete is doing and where they are. So part of that is the subjective stuff and the things that we can get from our watches, which is your HRV, your resting heart rate, how much you've slept, your current weight, your fatigue levels, mood, and soreness, or the things that we hear from athletes. So if you're a coach and your athlete's really moody, so like just going up and down with moods, or really tired, or like not really hitting things, you want to look at that because it's really, really important. If you're coaching yourself, it's the same thing. All of these metrics come into play. I like to consider it kind of like a stress bucket. So you have a bucket and you can only put so much in there until it overflows. Training is a stress, outside stress from work, family, all of that is stress. And so you can only fill that bucket so much. And all of these metrics play a role. So if your resting heart rate continues to rise out after the week, that is something to look at, to be aware of, because that's something that is a warning sign that you're probably stressing your body a bit too much. So you have your heart rate zones, you have your blocks, you have your training, and then you have the metrics that you can look at. It could be overwhelming for a lot of people, but for those that are really interested in it, this was just kind of an overview of how much this can really help you get the best out of yourself. And it's not complicated once you start looking at it or working with someone who can help you understand it a bit more day after day. Now we're going to look at some of the essentials besides all that training stuff that we looked at that are really important to get the best out of your training and for your racing. 4 things that I really, really like to look at with athletes: strength training. 1 to 2 times a week is really, really important, especially at the start of the season. But as you progress in your season, as you get older, especially over 40 years of age, you're going to lose your muscle mass like almost every year. It's just part of the process of aging. And so to prevent that from happening faster, you want to stay in the gym and do specific strength training. If you don't know what to do, you can go onto our site. I have a ton of free resources. You just can click on strength training and you have it. Um, the second thing that I love to work with athletes with, because it's really the fourth thing that is so important for training and racing, is your fueling practice. I always like to look at a workout not only as, okay, I need my watch, I need my shoes or whatever, but I also need my fuel. It's always just cohesive and part of the program. You are not going to get faster. You're going to probably get injured if you're not fueling right. You have to think of fuel not as a snack or something that I need to hold on to, but something that will fuel the fire. You cannot do it without logs in the fire. So you need the logs. You need the gasoline on there if you're going to make a really, really big fire. So pretending that you can't, you're just going to have a simmer of a fire. If you want to get the best again out of your performance, who you are, you have to fuel your training. Now we can go in a whole bunch with fueling, and maybe I can come back and talk about that. But we again have a bunch of free resources on the website as well. So, and then the other thing that people really don't look at is the mindset. And so understanding who you are as an athlete and what really makes you tick. So sometimes people really like the data. They like to see their chronic training load increase. They like to see the graphs. It really is inspiring and motivating. They like to see how fast they can do 100. Like all of that's helpful. Whereas others need to see the progressive feel. They're more of a feeler, intuitive athlete. And so understanding your own mindset is really, really helpful in learning what you need in order to continue to train and race. And so there's a bunch of mindset tools out there. I encourage you to look at things like that, not to keep plugging myself, but I've really tried to put a lot of things that are free on the website, including all of these things, so that you as a self-coached athlete can go there and find a strength training, understand what you need to do with fueling, how to look at your mindset, and really tracking what matters. And so over time, there'll be more and more out there. But I really try to get rid of the noise that happens on the internet and really what are the specifics that this athlete really, really needs. And so, so again, going back to tracking what really matters in the workout. So like how you feel, the motivation, understanding that data. We won't go too deep into strength, but I went to that. Fueling practices, there's a lot on the website for that. We don't need to do that. Just a specific thing on mindset training. It doesn't mean you need to read books or do that stuff, but find something that really helps you. So what helps me a lot when I'm out there is a simple mantra. Like sometimes if my mind is whizzing around all over, I just say the same things over and over again, or I find a song. Lately, it's been the Beatles. We all lived in a yellow submarine. So whenever my mind goes crazy, I just literally repeat that over and over. And that is a mindset training tool. It helps me calm down, stay in the moment, and get rid of all the noise. But that's the song that's been in my head for like 3 weeks. And then some of the biggest mistakes to avoid. I've done all of them. Sometimes you just train too hard all the time and you're in this gray zone. So you're never really going to build those houses or build the whole roof or everything. You're just going to be kind of on one level, and going too hard all the time isn't going to allow you to build that nice big structure, and you're only going to get so fast. A lot of people think, oh my gosh, my race is in 8 weeks. I need to start training race pace, and you're skipping that huge base phase. Well, your house is going to fall apart. Sometimes if you don't test and you say, oh, I've got heart rate zones from a year ago, they're fine. Well, they're not probably accurate. Things change and they should change. And so you really want to check them every couple months. Doing too much too soon. A lot of us get antsy, especially when spring comes up in the Northeast. We're like, okay, it's time to hit it hard. Let's go. And then ignoring the recovery and adaptation that is required. So a lot of athletes do need a day off a week to really recover and have it as a consistent thing, especially if you're working 40 hours a week. Like you have to practice, some stress days and non-stress days so you get that adaptation. And then the biggest one that I see is doing someone else's generalized plan. And so if you're taking a plan off the internet, or if you're taking someone else, oh, I'll just do what she's doing because I'm doing the same race. Again, you're going to build a house. But is it your house? Is it specific to what you actually need as an athlete? And that's why if you're really wanting to get the best performance, this is where either a coach comes into play or you're really learning about the different types of training that you need and understanding where the testing comes into play and your zones. Those are the biggest things. If you get your zones accurate, check them every 8 weeks, then that is like the biggest component. And then from there, you build the house. And then lastly, not practicing the race nutrition. So a lot of people say, "Oh, I got a plan. I'm going to take a gel every 25 minutes." But yet in training, they skip gels all the time. They don't practice it. And then come race day, it goes terribly because you haven't actually practiced it. So it's like trying to go run in brand new pair of shoes or trying to go arrow on your bike when you've never done it before. You have to practice that. The body adapts really, really fast as long as you do the right things to do that. So just quick recap. One, test your zones, get accurate zones. I swear, it's the number one thing that will help you. Track the metrics if you're interested, or even if you don't have things on Training Peaks, track how you feel in the morning, how you feel at night. You could check your resting heart rate. If it continues to elevate, sometimes it will drop. You want to look at those and just kind of see where you are as an athlete. A lot of people use a bunch of Garmin's. They can use the Aura Ring. All of that stuff comes into play, and it does help you as an athlete kind of understand yourself. And thirdly, choose your focus. So instead of just going for a generalized plan or, "Oh, it's time to build this," really look at what type of training you need. I'm here to help. I'm happy to answer a bunch of emails or questions. I love our community, and so happy to answer any of that. I can't see number 4 because it's hidden. I'm just gonna keep going. But again, you want to listen to your body, retest and look at things and make sure that you're doing the right workload and so that you can stay consistent. So the two things I always ask people is, why are you doing what you're doing? And thirdly, when you're doing it. If you can't answer those questions, you're probably not training properly for yourself. You should be able to know why you're doing what you're doing, when you're doing it, and what is it that I'm trying to improve on. If you're trying to raise that roof because you want to get faster, well, then you do certain types of training. And so understanding that, even with if you're with a coach or not, that's where you need to understand what you're doing. I swear there's so much motivation understanding what you're doing and really seeing the changes that happen. It's a dramatic shift as a mental mindset as well. Um, so just to look at, can you do all this yourself? Of course you can. It's going to take a lot if you haven't experienced it, but you can definitely do it. It works if you have time to kind of understand and learn this and are disciplined. You can follow a plan. You can objectively look at yourself. So I find a lot of athletes, they get plans, but they can't take a bird's eye view of things. And that's kind of where a coach comes into play. So I would hire a coach, look at a coach if you want some more expert guidance, really want the best out of yourself because you're having someone, and make sure you're selective on who is being your coach and looking at their education and stuff. But you're working with someone who wants the best out of your performance. So there's two avenues that you can definitely go to. Long story short, it doesn't have to be complicated. I know I threw a lot at you, but there is a lot if you want the best for your performance. But you can take the small pieces, get your zones right, understand what you're training for, where you are in your training. And if you need to follow that progressive blocks, you can do that. Build that strong house. If you want to get a little bit more specific, then we look at the CP over VO2 and get that. And that's where I would hire a coach because that's where you can get those specifics, things that you need as an athlete. And just make sure that you rest and recover at least weekly in order to make those adaptations. Just quickly, there's a bunch of free resources all over the internet. I really have found what I believe is very, very valid with my degrees and everything else. They're all on Angela Naeth Coaching, and those will continue to build out. But my goal is to provide as much input and support, even if you are coached by Angela Naeth Coaching or not. So feel free to look at them. If you need free zone testing, we do that as well. So we can get you set on the right path. And that's all I got.
Thank you. That was so much information. Thank you
It
so
was.
much, Angela. That was a lot. I think that I am not going to be the only one that once I take this recording and put on YouTube, I'm going to go back and be like, wait, what did she say about this? I love the analogy with the house and
Mhm.
building your house, and that helped me at least visualize a little more. I hope that helped for the rest of you. We have just a few minutes left. If anyone has any questions, please put it in chat, and I'm happy to ask um, for you. I know you put your free resources. You put that up on your last. Thank you, Richard. On your last slide. I also put it in chat. And I just want to give a shout out to Richard who was taking notes. Like, I love
Mhm.
that. Entire time he took some great notes. So good for you, Richard. I really appreciate you doing that. All right. How about some questions? I know Nellie Lyons is great asking super questions. So Nellie, let's get your fingers going there. Yeah. I see you there. So, Angela, if you, let's say we're 16 weeks to the Wellfleet Sprint Triathlon, which is June 6th, by the way, in Wellfleet, Massachusetts, if anyone wants to come. Um, so it looked like in your training that like that was kind of that zone, like you were like 16 weeks out. Can you help me and maybe
Yeah.
some others understand like
Yeah. So
if you're
if we're
preparing
not,
for a sprint?
yeah, so if you're doing a race then 16 weeks out, I would probably look into a build threshold block. So you're still doing your aerobic load, but you want to do some intervals at zone two, zone three. So at Angela Naeth Coaching, we use ZR 1, 2, 3. So that would be kind of just like those kind of like a race specific effort in term of an Olympic feel. So you're building that kind of extra hard layer. It's about 7 out of 10 effort on the RP scale. And so how you would look at that is you would do like 2 by 15 minutes on the bike twice a week, but everything else really, really easy. So you're putting in a little bit of effort to build that second layer of the house right now. And I would do that for 5 to 6 weeks and then look at doing more specifics for the race.
Great.
Excuse me. And
Yep.
you do that for swim, bike, run. Now that's kind of like this the standard build up toward a race.
Excellent. Thank you. Um, Now, I know a lot of people talk about other ways of other zones, right? And usually there's like 7 zones that
Mhm.
we're kind of standard. Do you feel like it's better for people to like just start fresh? I mean, you went through a lot of like how do you test
Mhm.
yourself and know what zone you're in, that it's better to do your own testing, or you said something about free zone testing
Mhm.
um, with you all. Is there, so I guess it's 2 questions. One, should you just start test your zone, forget about whatever else you've been doing to know what zone you're in? And then the second one is if someone wanted to be able to test with Angela Naeth coaching, how would they go about that?
Yeah, so the first one is I would definitely test because we don't really know where your zones are. And if you were to look online, everyone has different types of zones. There's zones that are 1 through 7, like you said, there's 1 through 5. I try to make it as simple as possible, and they're based on sound lactate threshold. So overview, if you took 1,000 athletes, generally these zones work. And so when you want to do the testing, we do very specific efforts, and they're not hard. It's a 3 minute effort, a 6 minute effort, and a 12 minute effort on the bike on different days. And then for the run, it's pretty much the same thing, but you're out on a run as you do them. And yes, we provide free testing. You just have to go to the website. It's one of the tabs. Get free heart rate zones or free test zones, and you basically just fill out a form. It comes to me, and I provide you the tests. You do the test on your own whenever you can. I crunch the numbers, I build it out, and I push it back to you. And it's completely free just to kind of help you out to get to that first level of understanding where you are as an athlete and your zones. And with that, I also tell you if you're an aerobic athlete or an anaerobic athlete right now. So it kind of gives you that context of what you can do and give you the first starting point. And if you've had your zones tested, I would encourage you to do it as well because you might learn something and might make a few changes along the way.
Okay, thank you. If you question being asked, and it kind of goes right on exactly where we were just talking about. So if you were testing yourself,
Mhm.
what is it that you're looking for at like the 3 minute, 6 minute, 12-minute bike, or
Yeah.
or the
Yeah,
run.
so the reason we do 3 points. So if you think of your speeds go from slow to fast depending on the time zones, right? So if you have time and speed on a graph, you're going to get a power duration curve or a speed duration curve. So as the time goes longer, your speed or power is not as strong as three. We do 3 points to give us that graph. So if you only did two, it's only a line, right? So if you do three, you're going to get a power duration curve. That power duration curve at some point becomes unstable, and that's usually around 30 to 50 minutes for some people. That is what we call critical power or critical speed. Now, we do the 3 points to get that and get very specific to you as the athlete. Whereas if you just did a 20-minute test and estimated 0.95, you're only getting 1 point, one data point, and it's being extrapolated, like it's being best guess to see where that power duration curves. Doing these tests very specifically gives it very specific to you exactly. And that's why it's called the critical power or critical speed curve versus just a point on that graph, which is kind of arbitrary functional threshold power, which is something that people think you can sustain for an hour, but it's really, really hard to pinpoint that specifically. And so that's where these tests, and it's so much easier to do a 3, 6, 12 versus, a 20-minute, 30-minute, 60-minute all-out effort to estimate that power duration curve. So we do the same thing for the run with a 400 meter, a half mile, and a 2 mile to get those curves. So we need a short test, a medium test, and a long test to get that curve. And it just gives us accuracy to your zones.
Okay. And so when you're what you're doing in each of those zones are checking your heart rate or like
You're
I
just
think
getting
that's
your times. And so if you're on the bike, if you have a power meter, you get your power average. You can get your heart rate zones. The issue with just doing heart rate zones is heart rate can go up and down so many different times. And so for heart rate testing, we do it a little bit different. We do a 20-minute effort if we don't have any power. And we have some specific calculations to that. I look at race results if you have average heart rates for that. So there's a lot of things that I look at to kind of give you some averages for heart rate zones. But if we have power and heart rate, we can get really, really specific. And it's the same thing for the run. So you're gonna go out for a 400 meter and get your time, an 800, get your time, a 2 miler and get your time. You give me those times and I'll give you paces. And then if you want heart rate zones from that, then we take it to a step higher. And I say, I make you run at a certain pace and I get a certain heart rate and then I base your zones off that. So there's a few steps for all that to get really true, accurate numbers.
that is super helpful. Thank you. All right. We're at almost 8 o'clock. Does anyone have any other questions? The So far we've had some great questions and we've had great data. Oh, good. So we have Angela, we have someone that's just signed up for your testing. So
Oh,
that's
well, there you
wonderful. I'm
go.
glad that that was really
Fantastic.
helpful. That was excellent.
Yeah, and overall, again, if you guys have any questions, I know I spit out a ton, but I know it's more if you've had a coach or can understand it, but I'm very happy to answer questions in the community and the Facebook groups. It's my passion. So don't feel that you can't come and ask me, or if you see me in the community, I literally would love to talk to anyone and explain what I just talked about. So feel free to connect anytime.
Oh, thank you. All right, let me go ahead and close up. I know everyone's got places to go, and we really appreciate all the time that Angela has put into today's presentation. Um, oh, let's see. It looks like we have one more question. Um, let's see. Andy, do you want to throw that in chat? Um,
Yes, question and what the answer.
um,
She made a statement that she also asked.
her plug. Yep, and sorry, I've got Andy in the background. I don't know if you guys can hear.
I can hear.
And we did ask, this is always the problem. We answered Natalie's, or I asked Natalie's question with explaining the 3 minute, 6 minute, 12 minutes. Is that what you're referring to? There we go. Okay, so we did get that answer. Thank you. So I'm gonna have to give a plug for New England Endurance events. Also, since that we are the ones hosting. We have our first race, Wellfleet Sprint Triathlon, which is now sold out, but hopefully those on here now and those that will be looking at YouTube at a later date will be able to take some really great information to help with Wellfleet Sprint Tri. Um, June 13th is the Hyannis one. And so those are our June races. We have others the rest of the season. I'm not going to go through all those, but you can find them at neeevents.com. So thank you, Angela, so much for being on. We do have, this is a part of our race series, which is called Tri-Talks. And let's see if I can tell you. We have, oh, Ted Geddes is next month, and that's Catalyst Endurance Coaching. He's terrific, as well as Tim Snow and Emma Taylor. So please go to our website to be able to see those times and what they have to offer. Thanks so much, Angela. Good luck to you at this weekend's event, and thank you all for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Bye bye.